I'm doing a skin giveaway every single patch on my Discord. I also give a lot of great advice on Discord, so if you're interested in joining a Wild Rift community, please use the link below and join. What is up YouTube? I'm Royal, I'm rank 1 Wild Rift, and in this video I will be teaching you the support role. Support is probably the least understood role in Wild Rift. And even if you aren't a support main, this video is a must watch to understand the game better. No matter your rank, from gold to challenger, this guide will give you all the knowledge you need to become a godlike support player and have your team praising you in the chat. Also, if you're an ADC main, make sure to send this to your support duo queue, it will help them out a ton. If any of you are asking yourselves, oh, what does Royal know about support? He mostly plays carry roles like mid and jungle. Well, let me remind you that I got Challenger on the Chinese server on 300 ping, mostly playing support. So I know exactly what you need to do to climb on supports. Let's start with what the support role is. As a support, you only have one goal: to get your team ahead. That's it. Your decision making needs to be based on how to improve the game state for your teammates. A big mistake support players make in Wild Rift is focusing too hard on getting themselves ahead in an attempt to carry the game, but in the process they set their team behind and lower your overall chances of winning. So I will repeat, your job as a support is to get your teammates ahead. This of course doesn't mean you can't carry games, but how you carry games from the support role looks a lot different from how you carry games from other roles. Now that you understand your goal as a support, let's look at the different archetypes of supports. Each support subclass has a different way of getting your team ahead. There are three main support champion playstyles. Engage supports. These champions are usually tanks and specialize in initiating fights and are usually tanky with a lot of crowd control. Enchanter supports. These champions focus on protecting and buffing a member of your team, usually your ADC, enabling them to carry fights. And lastly, Mage supports. These supports apply a lot of pressure on the enemy team through poke and burst damage. Keep in mind, a few champions can fall into multiple of these support subclasses. For example, Karma can be an enchanter or a mage support. There are a few supports that don't even really fall in these categories, like Pyke, who is an assassin, but he can usually be thought of as an engage support. Braum, who is a protector, but he can be thought of as a mix of an engage support and an enchanter support. And Senna, who is a marksman champion and doesn't really fit into any of these categories. I guess the closest one would be mage supports. However, most support champions fit into one of these three categories. Each of these roles play completely differently. In this section of the video, I will give a mini guide for each of these three subclasses of supports and how to play each one. Then I will continue with the overall support concepts you need to understand to master the support role. Let's start off with engage supports. Engage supports thrive on starting fights and locking down key targets. They excel in aggressive laning phases and can dictate the pace of a team fight with strong crowd control. I will go more into roaming in a later part of the video, but for now it's important to note that these champions are also the best roamers, as they can catch enemies out of position with their engages. Some examples of these champions are Leona, Nautilus, Rakan, Alistar, and so on. In the early game, engage supports have a lot of kill pressure. Your goal is to engage on the priority target, usually the enemy ADC. Keeping in mind that if the enemy has a squishy support, it's often fine to engage on the support if you can kill them quickly. What you need to consider though is, if we engage on the enemy support, will the enemy ADC be able to 2v1 us after? Is he killing my ADC and stacking lethal tempo? For the most part, you should be focusing the enemy ADC, especially since killing them or even sending them back to base will make them miss gold from minions. However, you can keep in mind that sometimes you can focus the support. While playing against mage or enchanter supports, you need to keep your HP high. If you get poked down, you won't be able to all in. Most of the time, if you're full HP, engage supports have the advantage. But if you get poked down and start the fight with half HP, it would be a lot harder to win. With engaged supports, you also want to maintain bush control. This allows you to threaten engages and force the enemies to respect your presence and play more defensively, giving you priority. Most of the time, you and your ADC should be keeping the wave on your side of the lane to give you the space you need to engage. If you're always pushed up, the enemies will be able to walk back to the safety of their turret. Engage supports are also incredible at setting up ganks, so if you keep the wave in your side of the lane, it makes it easier for your jungler to come and gank. Speaking of ganks, engage supports are also great at diving, because they can initiate the fight and crowd control the enemies for your team to clean up, while also being able to tank multiple turret shots. So if you're slow pushing a big wave or you are constantly pushing, don't be afraid to call over your jungler and mid laner for a dive. In terms of wave manipulation, you want to keep the wave in your side of the lane unless you're setting up the dive. Roaming is the job of every support champion, not just engage supports. But engage supports excel at roaming. If your ADC is safe, look to roam mid lane, assist your jungler with Skull Crab, and invade or a gank, and deny vision in the river, making it harder for the enemy team to play the game. We'll go into more detail in the roaming section of the video, but keep in mind that as an engage support, you have to be proactive and set up plays with your roams. In the mid game, you need to keep pressuring the enemy by denying vision and roaming around the map to set up plays for your team. You have to be proactive. You have to be the one pinging your team and setting up the plays. And make sure you're playing with your team's tempo. Understanding tempo is very important for an engage support. If you don't know what tempo is, I'll give you a quick explanation right now. Tempo is the priority you have to make plays. Meaning, if your jungler has all of his camps up and you engage a fight that he has to follow up on, he has the opportunity cost of all those camps, meaning that the play is inefficient. Another example is if your mid laner hasn't recalled in a while, he will have less damage if you make a roam mid, because he has a lot of unspent gold. So in the mid game, if you are looking to make a play, make sure you're playing with tempo. You usually want to be playing with your jungler and ganking the lanes that he's ganking, assisting them by locking down the enemies. And like I mentioned before, it's crucial to deny vision in the river and the enemy jungle. This will make it a lot harder for the enemies to farm in the side lanes, as you and your jungler could pop out at any minute and kill them. In the late game and in teamfights, your role is the most important in the game. Your job is to engage the team fight. So you are the one that decides which fight is good and which fight is bad. This is one of the hardest macro concepts to understand, and being able to judge if you will win a fight before it even happens is an important skill. Of course, this takes a lot of experience, and it's not something that I can just tell you how to do, as each situation is different. So you need to find high value engages. Situations where the enemy carries are out of position are the most obvious examples. Next up, we have enchanter supports. Your goal on these champions is to keep your carries alive with heals and shields while enhancing their damage. Enchanters are amazing with hyper carry ADCs, as they're pretty much a free buff to any champion. For example, Janna gives nice shields and heals that also give bonus AD. Lulu gives attack speed, movement speed, and on-hit damage. Having one of these enchanters is like having 3 extra items, so carry champions become stronger. Most enchanter champions also have great counter-engage spells that allow them to disrupt the enemy's engage. Great examples are Lulu ult, Janna ult, Nami ult, and so on. Most common examples of enchanter supports are Yuumi, Lulu, Janna, Soraka, Sona, and so on. Early game is usually the weakest stage for enchanter supports. They get poked down and bursted by mages, while also getting destroyed in no lins by engage supports. You want to position in a way that you won't get poked down or engaged on, but you still need to be far up enough to help your ADC so they're not just laning 1v2. A mistake a lot of enchanter support players will make is to sit super far behind their ADCs, making it impossible for the ADC player to lane, and they will often end up feeding. You need to be ready to trade back with the enemies if they overextend. Also, for some unknown reason, enchanter players refuse to use their ult attacks during trades. Please ult attack in the early game as an enchanter. Your job in lane is not to sit back and spam shields. You need to walk up and help your ADC win trades. Enchanter supports are actually very strong in short trades. because their shields will block a lot of the damage the enemies deal. So make sure you're trading efficiently and utilizing your cooldowns to win these sort of trades. In terms of wave management, you usually want to keep the wave near your turret and play passively, not giving a lot of room for engaged supports to wall in you. Enchanter supports usually don't have any mobility, so they're vulnerable to ganks or engages. Playing near your turret will allow you to control how trades go, and you can easily hide behind your turret whenever you need. So take short trades and back off to the safety of your turret. For warding, use defensive wards to avoid getting ganked and try to track the enemy jungler. Don't worry, we'll talk about jungle tracking in a later part of this video. In the mid game, while enchanters don't roam as well as engaged supports in terms of setting up kills, they're amazing at following up on engages and countering roams. So when your ADC is safe, don't be afraid to roam around with your jungler. You also want to make sure that you're denying vision, so it's harder for the enemy team to make plays. Enchanter supports shine in teamfights. Stay behind your carries and keep them alive by disrupting the enemy engage while also healing and shielding your teammates. You should be playing around the fed members of your team that can dish out the most damage. Most of the time this will be your ADC, but that is not always the case. A lot of Enchanter players fall in the trap of buffing their ADCs that are really far behind instead of other champions that are fed. Teamfights are also where a lot of your skill expression comes in. A nicely timed Lulu polymorph can shut down even the most fed enemy champion. A good Janna Tornado or Nami ult can completely disrupt a great engage. So how you use your spells often determines the outcome of the whole game. Positioning is key in fights, and you will often get focused down, so you need to make sure you're in range to help your team while also staying safe from the initial engage. Lastly, we have Mage supports. Mage supports function slightly different than the rest of the supports. They aren't great at putting your team ahead, but they are great at putting the enemy team behind, which achieves a similar result. Mage supports excel in poking, bursting down mispositioned enemies, and controlling the fight with their range. The most common Mage supports are Lux, Zyra, and Karma, but a few other supports like AP Nami, AP Seraphine, Brand, Veigar, Annie, and Morgana can also be played. In the early game, your goal is to poke down the enemies and make their laning phase hell. You want to maximize your poke by using your long range abilities to harass the enemies while staying out of range of their damage. When you're versus an engaged support, you want to avoid all-ins until you have poked them down enough that you can burst one-shot them when they finally decide to engage. You need to be very oppressive in lane and get a lead by forcing the enemies to recall, giving you easy turret plates while the enemies miss farm. You need to be very mindful of ganks and engages as you're very squishy and don't have the peeling or defensive tools that Enchanter supports have. Most of the time, you will also unintentionally be pushing the wave with your spells, but that's completely fine. You can use this priority to roam and help your mid laner and jungler. Just make sure you're not becoming an easy kill for the enemy team by overextending and trying to poke them under their turret without proper vision. Mage supports are all about pushing your limits and playing to the edge, constantly pressuring enemies while being just out of range for them to be able to take you down. In the mid game, you want to continue to poke the enemies as much as possible, pressuring them and making it difficult for them to get easy farm, forcing them to constantly run back to base and waste time. Make sure you deny vision to make it more likely that the enemies are caught out of position and you can use your huge burst to one-shot them. It is incredibly hard for the enemy team to face check objectives versus a Lux that's ready to one-shot them. You need to continue to be mindful of hard engages and position in a way that you won't be getting caught out. Teamfights is probably your weakest point in the game. You can function as a secondary damage dealer, but unless your team has tankiness and utility from other roles, your team comp will be pretty squishy and easy to take down with a good engage. This is why you need to abuse your range to poke down enemies and catch them out from afar while staying safe before the fight even starts. You obviously excel in choke points because of your AoE damage, especially in the jungle where the enemies are all clumped up. Also keep in mind, in teamfights you wanna stay at your max range to avoid getting clapped. Now that you understand the different support classes, let's go in depth on some macro concepts that you need to understand to become the best support in the world. If this video has helped you out so far, please drop a like. It tells me you enjoy these types of educational videos and motivates me to make more. Also, make sure you're subscribed. Most of you that watch my videos are actually not subscribed, and that makes me a sad Teemo. We've already explored trading, teamfighting, and wave management for each support subclass, so let's move on to vision and roaming. As of right now, support items allow supports to deal more damage to yellow wards, making them great users of the control ward and sweeper trinkets. What I recommend doing is starting off with a control ward or yellow trinket to get some early vision and avoid early ganks, but on your first few bases, make sure you always switch to sweeper. It's simply too useful when you can one-shot wards with one ult attack. It allows you to clear vision extremely quickly and be safe while doing it, which is useful in the mid game to deny vision of the enemy jungle and river, and of course is extremely useful to deny vision of the objectives. For the most part, vision is a team game and not exclusive to support. So try and synergize with your team to set up proper vision and contest the enemy team's vision. And vision is all about priority. Walking in blind to an objective to ward it or sweep the enemy wards can very easily be the reason you lose the game. So how do you properly contest vision? With lane priority, and this applies to both early, mid, and late game. So before you go to ward or sweep, push out the lane with your team, wait for the enemies to show in the lane and farm the wave. This way you know where they are, clearing the minions. This gives you the chance to safely go into the fog of war since you know where the enemies are and contest the vision. Obviously, if you can't get push priority and the enemies are the ones going and contesting vision, well, good for the enemy team, they probably watched this video and learned a lot. But in those cases, what you can do is rely on a numbers advantage. Ping your jungler and your winning lanes to come assist you in contesting vision. Next up, let's talk about the most important thing for support, and that's roaming. Roaming is more than just going to another lane and trying to get a kill. It's a way to pressure the map. Here's the situation. You're playing support and you push out the wave. You go to the river and sweep the enemy vision. Now, whenever you are not showing in lane, the enemy mid laner has to fear that you could possibly be coming mid. So even if you're just sitting in a bush, the enemy mid laner has to respect a possible roam and play safer. You don't even have to roam to apply pressure, just the threat of you roaming can do that by itself. Another core part of roaming and vision, especially in the early game, is jungle tracking. Being able to track where the enemy jungler is based on which camps they have already taken can give you an advantage when roaming because it opens up opportunities to save your team or counter gank. This is mostly the responsibility of your jungler, but the support can assist with it too. So if you have knowledge that the enemy started on the dragon side of the map, you can assume that they clear their 3 camps on that side, they will move on to the other side of the map to clear those camps. So now you know that they will either gank mid or baron lane. If you have priority in your lane, you can start preemptively moving to the mid lane to counter gank the enemy jungler. The most important roaming technique that very often gets overlooked is the roam from base. Pretty much every support in Wild Rift makes this mistake. When you recall or when you die and you're back in the fountain in the early game, you need to stop always just running back to your lane. Supports only get half gold from minions, meaning that you lose a lot less than other champions if you miss minions. This means that if your ADC farms, you're able to roam without missing a lot. So when you come back from base, you will often have the option to roam mid lane or roam to the jungle or Skullcrab if a fight is happening. So what I recommend doing is moving through the jungle towards your lane, so you're still a little close to the jungle and to the mid lane if a fight does erupt and you can make your way there quicker. Roaming mid sometimes isn't just even for a gank. A lot of the time, the extra pressure from you being in the lane can help your mid laner push out the wave and get a good base timing, or if they were being pressured in the 1v1, it can relieve a lot of pressure. There's been so many times where I'm hard winning mid lane, ready to get a solo kill or force the enemy off the lane denying the minions, just for the enemy support to show up, heal my enemy laner or help them push out the wave, And just like that, all my trades went to waste. And now, the enemy has lane priority over me. I blame support difference and get tilted. So be that better support that helps your team look at the game through their lens. What does your team need? Does my jungler need me right now? Is he invading? Is he contesting the skull crab? Should I be helping them, or am I wasting my time? Should I just go back to my lane and get that extra gold from the minions? These are the questions you need to be asking when deciding where and how to roam. Obviously, the answers to these questions are situational, but you won't ever improve as a support if you just sit in your lane trying to win the 2v2 and then getting mad when the rest of your team loses, when you could have helped them gain an advantage. If you only want to play for yourself and beating the enemy laner, you probably shouldn't be playing support. The last roaming tip you need for the early game is the objective. At minute 4:34, the last wave before the objective meets in the middle of the dragon lane. Once your ADC clears out this wave, I recommend recalling to spend your gold so you can be as strong as possible for when the objectives spawn. Now, instead of running back to your lane, you will go to whichever objective your jungler is contesting. The Baron side objective, Rift Herald or Enchanted Assemble or whatever it's called, is more powerful and more useful. So if you can win a fight right now, I recommend pinging your jungler to go for that objective. By you roaming there, if the enemy support doesn't roam, you will always win that fight thanks to the numbers advantage. So as a support, when the first objective spawns, you need to play with your jungler, not your ADC. Now let's move on to the mid game roaming. In the mid game as a support, you always want to start from the mid lane. Coming back from base, you want to be mid lane. This allows you to be in the center of the map and you're able to quickly roam everywhere. Obviously, if you're needed in the dual lane, the dragon lane or the baron lane, run there immediately. But for the most part, you want to go mid lane so you can roam to those other lanes quicker. Because if you go to dragon lane and your baron lane suddenly needs you, how are you gonna get there, right? So go mid lane, push out the wave with your carries and deny vision in the river. This will allow you to easily roam to the side lanes and help your side laners. You want to make sure, and I cannot stress this enough, play with your winning lanes. Do not roam to losing lanes to help them. Set up with your jungler on your stronger side lane. Let's assume you have a 0-5 Fiora versus a 5-0 Jax. Your instinct might be to go and roam and help them, but if the enemy team also roams, you will be in a huge disadvantage in that fight because of how stronger Jax is. But if you roam to your 5-0 Jace, who is versus a 0-5 Kassadin, even if the enemy team follows your roam, you will easily win that fight. So push out the mid lane with your carries and roam to your winning side lanes and deny vision there and set up plays. The exact same concept applies to objectives like the second, third, Elder Dragon and Baron Nashor. You want to push out the mid lane, and while the enemies are clearing out the mid lane wave and you have vision of them doing so, you can walk into the fog of war to deny the enemy vision and allow for your team to set up your own vision. And again, vision is a team game, but as a support you need to spearhead those efforts. To conclude, let's go back to the start. As a support main, you only have one goal: to get your team ahead, and that's it. You're the only role in the game that does not have the responsibility to farm. This gives you a bunch of free time to roam around, play with vision, set up your team for success. So go out there and make me proud, little support mains. Thank you for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video and learned something, and subscribe for more Wild Rift videos.